Namaskar. Welcome to this special conversation with Dr. Frank Morels, who is also addressed as Shri Dharma Pravartaka Ачария. And the introduction that I have for him also says that he is dedicated to restoring Sanatan Dharma as a global force. We'll find out what is it that he has chosen as his mission, why he has chosen that as a mission, and how much is his understanding of Sanatan Dharma in sync with what people say is there in the scriptures. So a lot of things there. Welcome, Dr. Frank.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Let us begin with your definition of Sanatan Dharma. What is it that you consider? Is it Hindu Dharma? It is different than Hindu Dharma? What is Sanatan Dharma?
Well, it is Hindu Dharma. Sanatana Dharma is synonymous with Hinduism. I personally prefer the term Sanatana Dharma to the word Hinduism, only because the word Hinduism, you don't find these in the Sanskrit literature. It's not indigenous to the religion itself. Rather, the term that you do find again and again repeatedly throughout the scriptures is Dharma. And the word Dharma in conjunction with different words, sometimes Vishva Dharma, sometimes Sanatana Dharma. And what's significant about this is that the term Sanatana Dharma is incredibly profound philosophically. What's meant by Sanatana Dharma very simply is, first, Sanatana means that which is eternal, that which always has been. And the word Dharma is actually very difficult to translate into English. Really, what you could say is it means natural law. The concept of Dharma is that inherent within the very structure of the cosmos itself, there are certain natural laws that are put in place by God. And if we ourselves live in accordance with that natural law, with that Dharma, then we ourselves personally, but also socially, have happiness, prosperity, fulfillment, etc. And if anything, many people have said that today, with all the problems that the world is facing today, everything from war to poverty to depression, just so many problems that we're facing, the very reason why is because we are not living in accordance with nature. We're not living in accordance with God's law, with Dharma. So yes, Sanatana Dharma is Hinduism.
You know, it's very interesting when you say that the natural laws laid down by God. Mm-hmm. Now, this is your understanding about the laws laid down by God. Mm-hmm. And somebody else who is looking at the world from a different point of view would say that, no, that law is not God's law. This is the God's law. Mm-hmm. So how do you reach to the point where you say that this is the standard or authentic law laid down by the God?
Oh, that's a very good question. What you're asking me is a question of epistemology, to use the technical term. In other words, it's the question, how do we know? How do we know anything? Because you're right, anyone can make any philosophical statement. Oh, such and such is the nature of the universe. Well, how do you know? Ultimately, the way that you can know spiritual or religious conclusions and what truly is siddhanta, what is actual truth, is not by debate, not by, oh, my opinion versus your opinion versus someone else's opinion, but you go to authority. So in other words, let's say that I'm not a medical doctor. You know, let's say that I'm having a debate with someone else who's not a medical doctor about the proper way of doing brain surgery. Well, the person and I can disagree, but ultimately if we really want to know, we go to the authority. We go to a brain surgeon, someone who does know. And then that person's opinion should be conclusive, because that's what they've studied all of their life, you know, and there is no higher source. In the same way, yes, there are diverse opinions as far as different spiritual questions. Ultimately, how do we know? You go to the source. Ultimately, of course, the source is God, but then it's difficult for us as human beings to communicate with God directly, so therefore, what do? We go to those human beings who have communicated with God, what in Sanatana Dharma are called the Rishis. The Rishis are individuals who have perfected themselves through yoga in such a way that their ego has completely dissolved, and quite literally, all that is there is God realization. You know, people talk about the Rishis all the time. There's no Hindu who hasn't heard these terms, and we can even name a few of them. The truth of the matter is, when we think of the Rishis, unfortunately, many Hindus tend to think of the Rishis as these divine beings who are very far from us, not understanding that actually the Rishis were human beings at one point just like us. And through the process of yoga, meditation, bhakti, etc., what they do is they spiritually evolve to the point where ego is gone and they become quite literally like clear, transparent mirrors to the spiritual world. You know, to give an example, when I try to explain what the Rishi is, what this spiritual authority is, you know, often when I'm giving a talk, there'll be, you know, often a window there. And I'll tell people, now look, and I'll point to the window, what do you see? And let's say there's a tree on the other side. They'll say, oh, well, I see a tree. And I'll say, yes, that's true, there's a tree there, but look again, what do you see? And they'll just say again, well, there's a tree. And we'll do this several times, and then I'll finally tell them, yes, there's a tree, but do you also see the window? And then finally they'll get it. Oh, yes, I guess there is a window there, I just didn't think about it because I'm looking through the window. The Rishi, the spiritual authority, the saint, so to speak, is like that window. They're there. They have their existence. You know, you can tap the window. It's there. But the purpose that they serve is that we may see through them and see the spiritual realm. Quite literally, when the Rishi is there, when the true Guru is present, when you see that person, yes, you're seeing a person who's actually manifest there, but you also are experiencing God manifest through that individual. God is present. And when that Rishi speaks to you and gives you knowledge, you can know that that knowledge is quite literally just coming right through them. And that's how our scriptures are revealed, the Vedas and all the scriptures of Hinduism. This is why we consider them aparushaya. We consider them to not be man-made. Because the rishis are not just kind of sitting there and speculating, oh, okay, what's the meaning of life?
I'm just interrupting you.
No.
Because
I want to talk about faith just for a moment because it's a very important topic actually, and since you brought it up, Hinduism doesn't put a lot of emphasis on faith. You'll notice it's the word is Shraddha. You'll hear it every so often, but unlike the Western religions, it's not something that's really stressed in Hinduism. The reason why is because Hinduism is not based on blind faith. Hinduism is not based on the idea that, well, this is what we believe, we have no proof of it, but we're still going to believe in it anyway. You don't find that in Hinduism a lot. Rather, there is faith, but it's faith that is based upon experience. So to give an example, when I get onto an airplane, how do I know that I'm going to reach my destination? It's a type of faith, but it's faith based on the fact that I've gotten on the plane so many times before. It's worked in the past, so therefore, even though I can't guarantee that I'll get to my destination this time, I have faith that it will happen because I've had that experience. In the same way, when we're studying scriptures, more importantly, when we are practicing Sanatana Dharma, when you practice, what is wonderful about this religion, about this spirituality, is that when you do that practice, you have a result. You have a result. And I'm sure many people in the audience have done this. You've done puja in such a way that you can feel God's presence there. I'm sure people in your audience have done yoga asanas, and you feel the result in your body. You feel more energetic, you feel limber, you feel peaceful, you feel wonderful. I'm sure people have tried meditation, and you feel the stress just melt away. So it's not merely a matter of blind faith. It is quite literally science. What Sanatana Dharma tells us is that if you follow these certain spiritual practices, if you practice, you will have a result. Period. You will have a result. And it's quite literally scientific in that it's replicable. In other words, if you meditate in such a way, A, B, and C will happen. If you don't believe it, you don't need to believe it, do it. And you'll see. You'll see the result. So our religion is not so much based on faith in the Western sense of just believing in something despite the fact that we don't have proof for it. On the contrary, the proof is our own experience. In Sanatana Dharma, the whole point is not just to think theoretically about God, not to just have God seen as this divine being who's so far away from us, who we can't see, so therefore we have to convince ourselves that he's there. This is what brought me to Sanatana Dharma, is that no, with this path, you can quite literally experience the presence of God within you, and it can come to the point where you experience this 24 hours a day. And, if I'm married to my wife, and my wife is sitting here next to me, I don't have to have faith that she's there. She's here. I can see her, I can touch her. She's here. She can speak to me. our relationship with God can become so rich, so full, so vivid through Sanatana Dharma that it's almost quite literally as if God is present within us and we can hear Him. Not a literal voice, but we can hear Him nonetheless. We can experience Him. We feel His love. And it's not a matter of faith. We know that He's real.
It's so beautiful to hear what you just mentioned, and continuing with the last lines on the softer side where you say that you can hear Him. Mm-hmm. So when you hear God, what is it that do you feel He's telling you?
For myself personally, I hear that God wants me to do anything I can to revive and save Dharma. You know, what is unfortunate is that despite the fact that Sanatana Dharma is such a rich and beautiful tradition, so ancient, going back thousands of years, and the fact that it's been so attractive to people that for thousands of years people have come to India, you know, searching for this. I mean, Columbus, we have to keep in mind, was not searching for Puerto Rico. He was not searching for the New World. He was searching for India. The whole world at one point was attracted to India and because of its spirituality. But what we see today is that unfortunately Sanatana Dharma is facing so many challenges, very real challenges. We live in a world that finds it more and more difficult to appreciate the sophistication and the beauty of this culture. We live in a more violent world, in a more materialistic world. And
you have done much more study than many of us do in terms of meditation and japa and all. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a little more individual kind of a question. But in your experience, what is God?
The $64,000 question. Well, from the perspective of Sanatana Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, of course, is actually a monotheistic religion. This is a misconception that a lot of people have. People will see all the devas and devis, and sometimes they think that Hinduism is polytheistic, you know, that there's the belief that there are many, many gods ultimately. That's not the case. Like the Western religions, Sanatana Dharma itself believes that ultimately there is one God. There is a slight difference between our monotheism versus the Abrahamic monotheism of the West, in that we take a much deeper, a much more profound approach to what is God. For the Western religions, God tends to be completely transcendent, completely separate from us as people, completely separate from the world. For Hindus, on the other hand, God certainly is transcendent, in that He is purely spiritual, but at the same time, He is purely immanent in all things as well. There is no place where God is not present. In fact, we go so far as to say that it's God's presence itself that gives meaning and substance and reality and existence to everything that there is. Literally every atom that exists because of God's presence within it. Therefore, one of the names for God is Narayana, He who sustains all beings, who sustains all reality. It's quite literally like God is holding us up in His divine palm. And without His sustaining of us, we just wouldn't exist. I like to tell people that if you can point to anything in which God does not exist, you're pointing to nothing. Mm-hmm. You know, because quite literally, if God were not present there, there would be nothingness at whatever you would point to. So yes, we as Hindus believe that God is present everywhere. And as such, we try to live in such a way that we see God's presence at all times, and we know that we're never alone. We know that at all times in our life, at times when we're doing well and we're prospering, but also at times when things are not going well, when we're sad, when we're depressed, when we're confused about life, when we're going through tribulations, God still is there. And the key is to always be aware of this. And if we can have that awareness of God's presence in our life, and if we can know that our very best friend, our most loving friend, is always with us, always there, then we can have a life of peace and happiness and fulfillment. Then all fear is taken away. So this is the Hindu conception of God. God, God as friend. At least this is how I like to approach God. The way we know God is through bhakti, through devotion, through love. And knowing that God is the source of all love, if we also can reciprocate with God, knowing that this being is a being who is always concerned about our welfare, who is always the antaryaman, the inner witness, who doesn't judge us, who is always there within our heart, seeing us during our best times and during our worst times, when we wouldn't want anyone to see us. God is there witnessing and loving us, and just waiting for us to quite literally turn around and realize we're not alone. This is the nature of God, and we can know this God through love, through loving Him. And then by extension, when we have that bhakti, when we have that love of God, by extension, we cannot help but love all beings. This is why when we have God in the center of our life, our family life gets better. Our relationships get better. Our relationships with our employees, if we have employees, or with our bosses. Because now, suddenly, our relationships are permeated with love.
What we see in the world is, unfortunately, people who are self-proclaimed religious people, many times they end up becoming the source of creating a chain of violent incidents.
Yes.
How do you reconcile these two things?
That's an excellent question, actually. It's a very good question, especially for our day and age. Because you're right, we do tend to see, in the name of religion, a lot of fanaticism sometimes, fundamentalism, certainly in the form of Islamic fundamentalism, but sometimes certainly even in Hinduism itself, we'll see, leaders who sometimes are not living up to everything that they should. Spirituality, ultimately, is a life of balance. It's a life of balance. And what I've seen is that when even spiritual leaders start to sway in one direction or another and they fall off balance, that's when you start to have problems. So for example, the two, you could say, opposite poles in spirituality tends to be jnana, intellectualism, on the one hand, but then bhakti, or let's say devotionalism on the other. Both have to be there. You need to have that balance. And when one person starts to veer toward one or the other exclusively, that's when the problem arises. When a person tends to be very emotional about their religion, but they don't use their intelligence, they tend to become fundamentalists. They tend to do things based on their emotion. They tend to do things based on blind faith. But then conversely, when people are purely intellectuals, then really their understanding of spirituality is very dry. As someone, who was in academia for some time, you see a lot of professors, for example, who, intellectually they can explain anything to you about religion, but they're not experiencing it themselves. So it tends to be very dry, very dull. So truthfully, you need to have this balance where you have both. A philosophical understanding of spirituality where you cultivate wisdom, jnana, on the one hand, but on the other hand, there also has to be devotion. And the reason why devotion is so important is it is the essence of spirituality. With devotion, what we are doing ultimately is we are ridding ourselves of ego. Because what are we doing when we're being devotional toward God? What we're doing is we are saying, Lord, I am surrendering myself unto you. And when we do this, we're transcending ego. We're transcending selfishness. We're transcending all of these modes of being that really actually harm us. It's interesting. Ego, when we have too much ego, it's quite literally like building a brick wall around our head. And if you have a brick wall, if you had a literal brick wall around your head, life wouldn't be very pleasant. You wouldn't be able to see outside. Others wouldn't be able to reach you, But if you dissolve that wall, now suddenly you can see the world around you. Now suddenly others can communicate with you. You can communicate with them. Now the sunlight can come in. Now you're living free. And it's amazing how ego actually is bondage. But when we dissolve that ego with humility, with devotion to God, knowing in our minds that, oh yes, I can have so many different talents, but God Himself upholds all the universes without any effort whatsoever. So whatever talents we have, they may seem wonderful, but we have to offer homage to that being who sustains quite literally everything, all of reality. When we can have that humility, when we allow that wall, that brick wall of ego to just dissolve, then we have peace. Then we have happiness. Then the rat race stops for us. But we still stay engaged in the world.
Shri Dharma Pravardaka Ачария, Dr. Frank Morales, when he says things, it sounds like music to our ears because there is harmony.